I had been planning the hike for a couple of weeks. It wasn't anything extreme, just a 2-day loop through the woods, about 10 miles total. My plan was to cover 5 miles on the first day, set up camp, and finish the remaining distance the next morning. When I pulled into the parking area, I was surprised by how large it was. Not just a small dirt patch, but a wide gravel lot that could easily fit maybe 30 cars. A few vehicles were already there, but it wasn't crowded. That, in a way, reassured me. It suggested I probably wouldn't be completely alone out there. After locking up, I put my pack on and started down the trail. The air was perfect, crisp, but not cold. The trail itself was in really good shape, well maintained and easy to follow. I settled into a rhythm, enjoying the sound of my boots on the packed dirt and the occasional bird call from the trees. It was the kind of walk that clears your head. However, about 3 miles in, I detected something. At first it was faint, but soon there was no mistaking it. Footsteps were coming from behind me. Someone was gaining on me. I glanced back over my shoulder and saw a lone hiker, a man perhaps in his mid-30s. There was nothing unusual about him. He was just another person on the trail. I slowed down a little to let him pass, as I dislike having someone right behind me. But he didn't pass. He simply matched my pace, maintaining that same distance. I assumed maybe he didn't want to seem pushy, so I dismissed it and kept moving. As I neared the spot I had planned to camp, I felt a sense of relief. It was a decent clearing, not far from the trail, with enough room for a small tent. I put down my pack and began setting up camp. Tent erected, sleeping bag unrolled, small stove placed out. I tried not to look back down the trail, but eventually I had to check. The man from earlier was there, setting up his own camp. It wouldn't have bothered me if he'd chosen a spot nearby, but he didn't just pick nearby. He selected a location that offered a clear view of my camp. Direct line of sight. That's what bothered me. It felt as though he had deliberately chosen a spot with a view of my camp. I cooked some food, sat there eating, and tried to shake off the feeling. After all, the woods weren't exclusively mine. He had just as much right to be there as I did. But the longer I sat, the more certain I became that I wouldn't be able to sleep with him so close. There was nothing specific I could point to as wrong, but my gut just told me it wasn't right, so I decided to relocate. There was still enough light left to find another spot. I quickly packed my gear, trying not to make it obvious that I was uneasy. But as I stuffed things back into my pack, I caught sight of him out of the corner of my eye. He was watching me. I walked back to the trail, my heart beating faster than it should have, and headed further along. After about 15 minutes, I found another spot. This one was tucked off the trail, hidden enough that you wouldn't see it unless you deliberately stepped off the path. Perfect. I set the tent up again, sat on a fallen log and tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that I was okay. But then I heard rustling off to the side. Not close, but not far either. I turned and my stomach dropped. It was him again. He was setting up his camp near mine once more. My hands grew cold. It was too much of a coincidence. He could have camped anywhere. And yet he followed me twice. I started packing immediately, my movements frantic, not caring about the noise. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him stand up and begin walking toward me. I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to find out what he wanted. I grabbed my bag, left some of my belongings behind, and ran full speed back toward the trail. My breathing was ragged, the woods blurring past me, and to my horror, I saw the man running after me. I pushed myself harder, every step fueled by pure panic. I thought I was done for, but then, as I burst back onto the main trail, something changed. The sound of his footsteps stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He wasn't chasing anymore. He stood for a moment on the trail, watching. Then he turned around and walked back toward where he'd set up his camp. I didn't stop running. Not until the trees thinned and the gravel of the parking lot came into view. My car was still there, waiting like some lifeline I'd nearly lost. I jumped in, slammed the door, and started the engine, driving away. The whole way home I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see his car behind me following me again. But the road stayed empty, just me and the sound of the engine. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time, engine running, hands shaking. I never did go back for the things I left behind, and I haven't been back to that trail since. Story 2. It's strange how memories can resurface out of nowhere. That's how this whole thing started. I was just sitting around one evening, bored and not really in the mood for anything, when the image of those old cabins near my hometown popped into my head. I hadn't thought about them in years. When I was a kid, maybe 11 or 12, me and my friends used to sneak out there all the time. They were these abandoned wooden cabins hidden away in the woods just off a back road. We always dared each other to go inside, told stupid ghost stories to scare each other, and even carved our initials into some of the beams. It was one of those places that was creepy but fun, like a childhood haunted house. We made some great memories there, and it always had that thrill of being a little too scary. When the memory surfaced, I realized I hadn't been back there since I became an adult. I wondered if they were still standing or if time and weather had finally brought them down. I had nothing else to do that evening, so I figured why not? Maybe it would be a cool little nostalgia trip. By the time I decided, it was late afternoon and the sun was already starting to set. Honestly, part of me wanted it to be that way. I wanted to embrace the spooky vibe just for the experience. The cabins weren't far, just a short drive out of town. I parked my car off to the side, half on the grass, and stepped out. The woods around there were dense. I locked the car behind me, adjusted the flashlight in my hand, and started walking. The trail wasn't long at all, maybe a 2-minute walk from the road at most. But as soon as I stepped into the trees, the air felt different, quiet and still. When the cabins came into view, I was surprised at how small they looked. As a kid, I remembered them as towering and huge, but that was just perspective. Now they seemed smaller, more fragile. The wood was more rotted than I remembered. The roofs were sagging, the paint long gone, but they were still standing. 4 of them in total, 3 small ones in a row, and the larger one set a little apart. I didn't bother with the smaller ones. Back then, they were mostly empty shells anyway. The main cabin had always been the most interesting, and I figured if anything was worth seeing, it would be in there. I circled around the outside first. The windows were dirty, the glass cracked and cloudy, but I shone my flashlight in anyway just to be sure. It didn't look like anyone was inside. The same old broken window we used to crawl through as kids was still there. Climbing through was easy, though I had to be careful not to cut myself. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. It was exactly how I remembered. Empty bottles, broken furniture, scraps of old blankets. I even noticed graffiti we had left there, but it was a strange feeling being in there alone. I wandered through the downstairs, my flashlight sweeping across every corner. The kitchen area was cluttered with rusted cans and warped cabinets. The living room sagged with collapsed chairs and broken picture frames. It was like walking through a memory. Eventually, I made my way to the stairs. They creaked under my weight, and I took them slowly, shining the flashlight ahead of me. Upstairs, there were only 2 rooms. The smaller one right by the stairs, and then the master bedroom at the far end of the hall. I checked the smaller room first. Nothing in there but an old mattress spring and some broken glass. It was empty. Then I turned to the master bedroom. The door was closed. That felt strange and disturbing for some reason. I stood there in the hallway, staring at it, feeling my stomach tighten. I don't know why I hesitated. Maybe it was instinct, but I was scared to open that door. I put my hand on the door and slowly pushed it open. The hinges gave a low groan, and I raised the flashlight. My whole body froze. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Sitting on the bed in the beam of my light was a face. A man's face. Pale, sunken, with eyes staring straight at me. He didn't move at first, and neither did I. My whole body locked up, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. He looked disturbed, unkempt, clothes in tatters, hair greasy and matted. It looked like he wasn't just passing through. He was probably homeless and living there. When he shifted, standing up slowly from the bed, the trance broke. I turned and bolted down the hall. The sound of his footsteps followed, heavy and uneven, pounding on the floorboards as he came after me. I didn't think, didn't look back. I flew down the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping, and aimed straight for the window I'd crawled through. I dove out, scraping my arms on the jagged edges, hitting the ground hard, but I didn't stop. I looked back and saw the man looking from the window. Thankfully, he didn't follow me further. Still, I kept running until the road came into view, and I saw the glint of my car in the fading light. I fumbled into my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a second, shaking and trying to catch my breath. My headlights cut through the trees as I turned the key, but even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face watching me. It's been a long time since that night, and I've never gone back. Story 3: I got into trail running because of my brother. Back when we both still lived at home with our parents, he'd take me out with him on weekends. At first I only went along because he wouldn't stop bugging me about it, but eventually I grew to love it, just as much as he did. There's something about running through the woods, away from cars and houses, where it's just you and the sound of your feet hitting the dirt. It feels like clearing your head in the best possible way. Even after we both moved out, we'd still go for runs together occasionally, but not nearly as often as before. Life just got busier. Still, I kept running on my own. It felt like therapy to me, a way to burn off stress and feel like I was keeping some part of that old routine alive. But after what happened, I don't run alone anymore. It was on a Saturday morning, early enough that the sun was just starting to rise. I had driven out to my favorite trail, a 2-mile loop tucked into a quiet state forest not too far from town. It was one I'd run more times than I could count. I liked it because it was short enough that you could push yourself, but long enough to feel like you were getting a real workout if you repeated it a few times. That day, I planned to run the loop 3 times. The trailhead parking lot was empty when I pulled in. That didn't surprise me. This wasn't one of the popular trails, and most people didn't bother with it unless it was summer. I stepped out, stretched a bit, tied my shoes tighter, and started off. The first mile was smooth, just the usual rhythm. The air was cool and damp, and the ground had that soft give to it that happens after having rained a day before. About a mile in, though, something caught my eye off in the woods to the right of the trail. It wasn't clear at first, just a shape that didn't seem to belong. I slowed down, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing through the trees. Something white. 2 of them, actually. They hung there high enough that they swayed slightly, as if tied to branches above. At first I thought maybe they were bags of trash, or some kind of weird markers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I veered off the trail. The ground was uneven, but I kept moving toward the shapes. My stomach sank the closer I got. These weren't just bags. They looked like white plastic, maybe thick canvas wrapped tightly around what looked like bodies. The shape was unmistakable. They were the size and form of people, arms pinned to their sides, legs together, suspended from the trees like grotesque cocoons. That's when I noticed the dripping. A dark liquid seeped through the seams of the bags, trailing down and pooling at the base of the trunks. The smell hit me next. Metallic, sour, like rust and rot. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, staring at those shapes. It was the sound that snapped me out of it. A sharp crack of a twig somewhere in the woods. Not the random sound of the forest. Not a squirrel. It sounded like a footstep. Someone was there. Someone had been there maybe the whole time. And the thought slammed into me all at once. Whoever hung those bags could still be out there watching me. I turned and bolted. My legs moved before my brain even fully caught up. I sprinted through the undergrowth, tripping, stumbling, but I didn't care. I just needed to get back to the trail, back to my car. My chest heaved, and I couldn't stop myself from glancing over my shoulder again and again. Each time I expected to see someone tearing through the woods after me, but there was nothing, just emptiness. When I finally broke through the tree line and hit the dirt of the trail, I didn't slow down. I ran harder, faster than I probably ever had, the loop stretching endlessly until I saw my car through the gaps in the trees near the trailhead. My keys fumbled in my hand, but I got the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it instantly. My body shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. By the time they arrived, it had been maybe an hour since I first saw the bags. The officers had me lead them back to the spot, retracing my steps into the woods. I could feel my chest tightening as we got closer, the dread building with every step. But when we reached the place, nothing was there. The branches were bare, no white shapes hanging, not even a scrap of plastic on the ground. It was as if it had all been cleaned up, erased. The officers walked around, shining their flashlights even though it was daylight by then, and they didn't find a thing. They wrote it up, told me they'd keep an eye on the area, but I could tell they didn't believe me. To them, I was probably just another guy who spooked himself in the woods. But I know what I saw. I know the shape of those bags, the way they dripped, the smell in the air, and I know the sound of that twig snapping wasn't my imagination. Someone was there. Whoever did that came back after I ran, and they took everything down. Maybe they'd been waiting in the trees, watching me freeze in place, deciding whether or not to make a move. I still don't know if what I saw were actual bodies or some sick prank. But I can't stop replaying the details in my head, trying to figure it out. And the truth is, I don't think I want to know. That was the last time I ever ran that loop. And maybe the last time I'll ever run a trail without someone else beside me.